go ahead and have a seat. Get comfortable. It's pretty tight in there, and the microphone will catch on your clothing, so if you'll just speak into it.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, great. I might move over to this other podium so I can see you, but I'll start here. And if you don't mind, could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Sure. It's Michelle Gaffney, G as in Gary, A-F-F as in Frank, N-E-Y.
And Ms. Gaffney, if you don't mind, where are you employed?
At the University of Mount Union.
Okay, University of Mount Union. Where's that located?
Alliance, Ohio.
Alliance, Ohio?
Right.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, how long have you been with Mount Union?
I think this is 29 years.
29 years? Okay. If you don't mind, what is your current position with Mount Union?
Currently, I serve as the Associate Dean of Students.
Okay. Have you been in that position for all 29 years?
No.
Okay. You've held other titles there?
Correct.
What are some of those titles?
I was a resident director, assistant director of housing, director of residential life, assistant dean of students, and now currently associate dean of students.
Is it fair to say most of your career has been involved in student transition and student life at Mount Union?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Gaffney, what type of education or training did you go through in order to obtain your positions there at Mount Union?
So, following undergraduate school, I went to Michigan State University and got my master's in higher ed administration, and worked at Michigan State while doing so, and then worked at Temple University in Philadelphia as a complex director before coming to Mount Union.
Okay. If you don't mind, can you describe, I know this is kind of a general question, but what type of university Mount Union is?
Mount Union is a small private four-year institution, primarily undergraduate, although we have added graduate programs in the last 10 years or so. We're considered residential. The majority of our students live on campus.
If you were to compare Mount Union to the University of Akron, much smaller class sizes and dorm life?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, were you in this position at Mount Union between the years of 2018 and 2020?
Yes.
Okay, and you're still there today?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask you kind of about the education there at Mount Union. Are there requirements that students must meet in order to remain a student at Mount University?
Yes. Students are required to make academic progress.
Okay.
Satisfactory academic progress.
Satisfactory academic. And is that monitored by the university staff or your office?
It is monitored by the university, not by my office specifically. That would be over in our, I serve in the student affairs office, and that would be monitored by the academic affairs office.
Okay. And is there open communication from your office and students regarding their progress in their education and their grades?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, if a student were to have a scholarship, can those type of benefits be put at risk if there's issues with their academics?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Although they have a period of time before it's reviewed.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that as
Yeah.
well. So let me ask you this. If a student is struggling with academics, what does Mount Union do to try to get a hold of this?
There are a series of a variety of different kinds of interventions, but if, as we're looking at it semester by semester, there's a committee that looks at it, that reviews all students at the end of every semester who are below a certain grade point average. And at that time, they may choose to put a student on academic warning, academic probation, academic suspension, or some of the means that they will use. Typically, probation would always occur prior to a suspension. We don't ever jump straight to a suspension.
Gotcha. So probation's your first step?
Yes.
Okay, and this committee, do they notify students when that student may have to deal with a probationary period?
Yes.
Okay, and how do they do so?
They do so in writing. I believe both hard copy and email, I believe.
And once that student is placed on probation, what is the goal of probation?
The probation is to help them turn things around and get on the right track, to make sure that they're aware of all the academic resources that we have on campus.
And that was my next question. Are they just sent this letter and said, hey, figure it out, or
No.
what are they provided with?
They're asked to make an appointment with our Director of Academic Support, and then that person will take them through, will look at their specific situation and see perhaps how or why they were struggling. You know, every student struggles for different reasons. So it may be academic preparation, it may be personal issues, it could be a variety of different things, and so they will try and tailor a plan for that student. But there are some common things that they typically are asked to do with regard to probation and attending maybe time management seminar, classes, or a variety of things that will hopefully help them right the path.
Yeah, so I'm going to break that down a little bit, and thank you. So,
Just 1 second. Ms. Gaffney, can you speak into the microphone? I think some of the jurors are having difficulty hearing
Okay.
you.
Absolutely.
sorry, can you still hear me from here? I'm just going to shift over here.
Yes.
Ms. Gaffney, when a student's put on probation, you mentioned that one of the priorities is try to find out why that person might be struggling, whether it's personal or maybe they're struggling with attendance or actual education. And then do they put like maybe a case plan together?
That's typically they would work out sort of a plan.
And you mentioned that there might be some extra requirements during probation, such as study plans or a course that they might have to take?
Right.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, are there other, I'm trying to think of the right word, and I apologize if I'm saying things backwards. Are there programs available to students who are struggling with scheduling, struggling with counseling, struggling with mental health issues? Are those available for students?
Absolutely. Again, through the Academic Support Office, there are tutors available for specific classes if there's a specific area that they're needed. There are also counseling services available. Our counseling services, we have excellent counseling services in terms of availability. We do open door hours every single day from 2 hours a day every day for students that can come in without an appointment. And then, of course, you can make an appointment and be seen on a regular basis. But if you just needed to get in to see someone right away, there's 2 hours every day when a student can just walk in and be seen that day.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And these are trained counselors? Are they therapists?
Licensed
Licensed.
counselors, yeah.
And so these therapists, if needed, or certified counselors could make referrals for continued care?
Yes, absolutely.
And those are the type of information that your office wants to know if a student is struggling?
Yes.
And Ms. Gaffney, if the probation period doesn't turn around, what happens next?
So after a second semester, if there hasn't been any change or progress, or if they haven't sort of worked the plan that was developed, a student may be placed on academic suspension and suggested that they take a semester off. It doesn't close the door to them coming back to Mount Union. It's just the thinking is after 2 semesters of no academic progress or very little academic progress, perhaps there needs to be a step away and a reflection or a reevaluation of things. And then hopefully many times those students come back to us.
Okay. Now, is that decision to move from probation to dismissal, is that automatic, or does the committee meet again?
The committee, that same committee that reviews all students, again, so that would be when they were reviewing all students at the end of the semester. So at the end of the spring semester, at the end of the fall semester, they meet every time, go through, decide whether to continue probation with different circumstances. So say the student has made some progress, they're still not they're still not making Dean's List, but they've made some progress. They might continue because their grade point is still below what you need to graduate, but they would be continued on probation. If there has been little to no progress, they might decide then to issue an academic suspension.
And do they weigh other factors like a student's ability to work their case plan, attendance, communication with the office?
Right, they do look at did they meet with the people that were suggested to them, and so on and so forth. Yes.
Okay. In a situation, unfortunately, where a student wasn't able to make that progress for whatever reasons they were dealing with, how does the process of dismissal work? And if I'm saying dismissal incorrectly, please correct me. Yeah.
We issue a suspension, an academic suspension.
Okay.
Is the first step after probation. A dismissal would be a permanent, and that's after a student has, if a student has been suspended, come back to us, doesn't make progress again, and then a dismissal.
Well, then that's my fault.
That's okay.
I'm sorry I said dismissal.
That's
So
okay. But
if he's-
with a suspension, the question is how are,
yeah, what's the process of
so if the committee
suspension.
makes the decision to suspend, a letter is drafted to them indicating that. It goes out to them through certified or registered mail, and also by email. But we do want to make sure that students have received it, and that's hard to verify by email. So there's a certified letter that goes to the home as well.
So that's mailed to where their listed
The
address
permanent
is.
home address.
What's the purpose of that letter, or what does that letter serve as?
To let them know that that their academics were reviewed and they are not unfortunately making satisfactory progress, and that at this time it is suggested that they take a break.
Now, once that student receives that letter as well as that email, are there any actions that they must take?
They have an opportunity to appeal the decision.
Okay.
So they can, and there's a date usually within a week or so of receiving the letter that they need to appeal by. The fall to winter break is a quick turnaround. So in the summer, I think they have in May it's a little bit longer, but this would have been a winter, so it would have been a quick turnaround to appeal. But there was an appeal process available. Otherwise, they're told that if they were living on campus, that they need to move.
Because they're no longer enrolled.
Right, they're no longer enrolled. They need to coordinate moving out of housing.
Okay, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Now, you mentioned that this letter of suspension is sent via certified mail. Is there a tracking system that Mount Union uses to ensure that that student has proper notice? Is there a signature?
There is a signature required.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that suspension, correct me if I'm wrong, the student can come back after taking a semester off.
Many times they do.
Okay. And you mentioned that once a student is suspended, they wouldn't be allowed back into the dorms. Can you explain the process of who's allowed in the dorms and who's allowed to use Mount Union's facilities as a student?
So to live on campus, you have to be enrolled as a full-time student.
And that would be the same for if you wanted to use Mount Union's facilities,
The
workout
recreation
room.
facilities, sure, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So it's
In
only
general,
for enrolled students?
Yes,
Dorms are for full-time enrolled students?
right.
Okay. And part of that suspension, that student would lose access to all of those availabilities?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would your office address issues if somebody was having concerns with the suspension's a little bit overwhelming, or they're not sure what the next step is? Would they have access to try to understand that through you?
Absolutely. Either the Student Affairs or the Academic Affairs Office, either one.
Okay, multiple.
The letters would have directed them to the Academic Affairs Office, more than likely,
Okay.
to understand the suspension and what to do to get back in. The housing piece would have been through an office in Student Affairs.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, I'm going to draw your attention to December of 2019. In your position, did you ever come across a Miss Sydney Powell?
Did I ever come across what? I'm sorry.
Miss Sydney Powell?
In December?
Or let me ask you this. If a student were to be suspended going into the spring, so January of the next year, would they be provided notice December of the year prior?
No.
When are they provided notice?
Well, it would have, by letter in December, they would have
In
been
December.
notified.
That's
But not
exactly
in
it.
person.
Not through you?
Yeah,
Just through,
not through
okay.
me.
So I'm going to mark and present to you what's going to be marked as State's Exhibit, I think we're on 3. Your Honor, may I approach? You may. Thank you. And Ms. Gaffney, if you can take a look at that and let me know if you recognize what it is.
Yes.
Okay, what is that document?
This would be the letter, the letter indicating that Sydney was suspended.
Okay, so that's a suspension letter. That's the letter that's sent to students?
Yes.
Okay. And that directs them on who to contact if they want to appeal or to address what's going on?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, who is that letter specifically to?
This is to Sydney
And that's Sydney.
Powell.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and take that from you. Just going to throw it on the document camera just briefly, okay? And Ms. Gaffney, is this a fair and accurate representation of the letters that are sent to students in this situation?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, here we see the University of Mount Union identifiers.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and then there's an explanation as to why the suspension is occurring, correct?
Yeah.
That first paragraph?
Yes.
Okay. And the bottom of that first paragraph, it specifically states what semester that student will be suspended from, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And for Ms. Powell, which semester was her suspension going to start in?
So it would have started in January of 2020.
Okay. And is that when Mount Union starts their spring semesters?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Ms. Gaffney, at some point, did you yourself meet Sydney Powell?
I did.
Okay. I just want to ask you briefly, do you recognize Sydney Powell in the courtroom?
Yes.
Okay, can you point to what seat she's sitting in? Thank you, Attorney Malarczyk. Okay, Ms. Gaffney, how did you come aware of Ms. Powell?
I became aware of her when one of our staff members, who's the director of student involvement, had one of her student leaders, that was a sorority president, come to her and indicate that there was a student coming to sorority meetings who wasn't on our list of enrolled students for the semester. And the sororities have to turn in a roster each semester of who is there for collection of dues and all of the, organizational records that they have to keep, both for their university and their national chapter. And so they were questioning the fact that we had left off a student from the roster who was attending sorority meetings, and trying to clarify the mistake, and our director of student involvement knew that it was not a mistake. She should not be on the roster, that she was not in fact enrolled for the semester.
Okay, so it was a student body who came forward looking for Ms. Powell's name on their sorority roster.
Right.
But Ms. Powell was not on that
Right.
roster. And why did your office know why she wouldn't be on there?
Yeah, right.
They knew that.
Right, wanted to know if there was a mistake or if she, was enrolled, because they needed to account for her or collect, dues, depending upon what the situation was. Yeah.
And Ms. Gaffney, what did you do next?
I reached out. We indicated to the president that the student was in fact not enrolled.
The sorority president.
The sorority president, and that was the extent of information we shared with them, and just said, well, actually, it's not a mistake. Sydney's not actually enrolled this semester, and students can be not enrolled for all kinds of reasons. Students decide just not to come back, or so that we're not sharing anything other than the fact that they're not enrolled. So, and then I reached out to Sydney. I don't know if I called her personally or if I asked Teresa, who's our administrative assistant, to call Sydney and ask her to come over to the office.
And why did you want to
and
talk?
meet.
Why did you want to speak with Ms. Powell?
Well, when I spoke to the sorority president who was questioning it, they had said that Sydney had been attending sorority meetings, but was also, they said, they questioned me about Sydney not being enrolled because they'd seen her going to class, they said they'd seen her going to classes.
So they
and that they were
believe-
living on, that they were still living here.
Okay.
So that's why I called Sydney to find out to try and get to the bottom of it.
Okay. And what happened? Were you able to contact Ms. Powell?
I was, and
Okay.
Sydney came over to the office.
Okay, can you describe that interaction?
So I asked Sydney about, I think when she first came in, I said, Sydney, there seems to be some confusion. It seems as though you haven't moved out of your residence hall yet, from what I can tell. But you're not enrolled this semester. You're not a student here this semester. And at first she said she replied to me that, oh, I am, but I'm still a student here. And I
Okay,
said, well, you
did
don't.
that catch your attention?
It did. And I had double checked before I called to see if, because I thought maybe she had appealed and I hadn't been notified that an appeal had gone through. So I checked and there was no schedule for Sydney. And I also checked at that time to make sure that she had received, with the academic affairs office, to make sure she had received the letter and signed for it, in the event that maybe she just, if she didn't get the letter, she didn't know she was suspended, and she had just come back and gone, started going to classes thinking she was, not realizing that she was suspended, on the off chance that that could happen. But I was able to verify from the academic affairs office that they had received back from the post office that the letter had been signed for. So I believed that she was aware that she had been suspended.
Okay, so, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Sydney or Ms. Powell herself said that she was attending classes?
Yes, when I said, but Sydney, you don't have a schedule. I just looked, and there's no schedule for you. And I believe she said something along the lines of, well, there were some problems, but I worked that out with my faculty over the break through email.
Now, were you made aware by any faculty or any professors that Ms. Powell was attending any of her classes or any classes?
No.
Okay. Were you made aware that Ms. Powell was signing in on attendance in any class that she might not be enrolled for?
No.
Okay. And how did you and Ms. Powell's conversation end at that time?
So spoke a little bit further and said, and that's when I actually addressed the fact that the suspension, I said, Sydney, you received a suspension letter that you signed for. And so we spoke a little bit further, and she said, well, yes, she had, and but she had been hoping to get things changed or fixed, and so she had been trying to work things out.
So she did acknowledge that she knew about her suspension.
She did acknowledge then that she knew she was suspended.
Okay. What did you explain to Ms. Powell that had to happen next?
So I explained that she would have to, unfortunately, leave campus, that she could no longer remain living in our residence halls, that she would have to go home. I offered assistance. I asked if she had told her family, and she said no. And I said, I could help you with that if you would like, I'd be happy to, if that's something. I know that's sometimes very hard for students to to tell their parents when you feel like you've maybe disappointed them or something along those lines. And I would be happy to call them with her if she'd like, to help tell them.
What was Ms. Powell's answer to that offer?
And she said no, she didn't need any assistance. She would, she knew what she needed to do, and she would do it, and she understood. She needed some time to move her things, and I said, we can give you a few days to do that.
So you were comfortable giving her some time to move out of the dorm?
Yes.
Now, how was Ms. Powell entering the facilities there at Mount Union at the time?
So, at that point in time, she had never turned in her key.
Okay.
So
is that like a physical key?
It is a physical key.
Okay. And what does that key give her access
So
to?
the key would have given her access to her room.
Her actual room?
Her actual room, yeah.
How would she get into the dorm building itself?
The ID cards are programmed typically based on active status, so.
Like a swipe card?
Right, yeah.
So when a student's not enrolled, that swipe card's not active?
Yeah, it is left on for students to be able to move out.
Okay.
So typically for a week or so at the start of the semester, it would have been on, and I don't know if it was not turned off or if it was, but typically a lot of our students, if they're traveling back and forth with their roommate or other students, they will just go in.
One person
It is
swipes.
not difficult to go in with another student. One person swipes and the other person goes in.
But through your office, you were going to give Ms. Powell a few days to get things organized?
did.
Okay.
And then we had the card set to turn off on a certain, I can't remember which day after that, however many days after that, we
Okay,
said
so access.
the card would stop working and we needed you to return your key by this date.
Perfect.
Which she did.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, you mentioned that you offer to communicate with a student's parents. Do parents not have access to student grades or notices of their suspension?
We don't communicate directly with parents, so that's
Okay,
up
why
to.
is that?
That's there's a law called FERPA, the Family Educational Rights to Privacy Act.
Kind of like HIPAA?
It is very much like HIPAA, but it is the educational version that says we can't communicate without that student's permission if they're over the age of 18.
So parents wouldn't be able to log into a portal to see grades specifically?
Yeah, students can give parents permission to do that,
Okay.
or sign a waiver that allows them to do that, but it has to be an active decision on the part of the student.
And speaking of grades, do students have access to their transcripts or their grades as cases or as?
At all times.
Okay, I'm going to present to you what's going to be marked as State's Exhibit 4, just briefly. I'm going to hand you this document, and Ms. Gaffney, if you can explain what you're looking at there.
This is one of our university transcripts for Sidney Powell.
For Sidney Powell, okay. And so Sidney Powell, when looking at that transcript, could look at what grade she was dealing with and what's going on in her classes?
Right. These are reports for the end of each semester.
Okay, end of the semester.
Right. So the final grades.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and take that. And just briefly, I'm going to go ahead and put this on the document camera. These are specifically, I'm going to draw your attention to the top left. These are specifically the transcripts for Miss Sidney Powell.
Yes.
Okay. And those are the classes she was enrolled in specifically
Yes.
in those semesters?
Correct.
Okay. And the transcripts ends at the end of the fall of 2019. She wasn't enrolled for the spring.
Correct.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, back to after that conversation with Ms. Powell, she said she just needed a few days. What happened next?
The following, so after that date elapsed, we became aware that Sydney was still spending quite a bit of time in the hall, more than enough that it seemed as though she was still living there, according to the hall staff who had checked to see if she had moved. And we found that she had not, in fact, moved out and
In
was
the
still
dorm?
of the residence hall and was still coming and going that following week.
Okay, so what did you guys do next?
We again asked Sydney to come over to the office. I think we had a staff member find her over in the residence hall and bring her over to the office. And
Okay, was she able to meet with you?
she was, yeah.
Okay, and what happened at that second meeting?
So when she came over for that meeting, she met with myself and Dean Frazier, our Vice President of Student Affairs.
Is that John Frazier?
John Frazier,
Okay.
right. We met with her together to indicate that we needed to talk about the fact that she was still living on campus despite not being enrolled, and that we couldn't continue to have her living on campus.
Do you know when this might have been during the spring semester?
It was in February.
In February, okay. And what happened? What was Sydney's reaction to that second conversation?
She understood. She was just taking her longer to move out. She needed a little bit more time. We asked if she had shared with her parents the fact that she wasn't enrolled. She said that she had, and because we again offered, would it help if we would to have a conversation? Would you want to call your parents and see if they could come down and help you move out?
And Ms. Powell told you that she already told them?
And then, yes.
Okay.
And that they were having that they were on vacation, in fact. They weren't home. And that they were having a lot of problems with her little brother. And she didn't want to bother them because of all the issues they were having with her little brother.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, what happened after that conversation?
We again set another date and said, okay, you have to be gone then. I don't know if that was a Wednesday or a Thursday, but by Friday, her card had been turned off because
Okay.
it was past the date. So I believe we gave her access again to the hall so she could actually, get in and out without having to have someone let her. And she was told to move out by that date.
I'm sorry. Can you recall what happened after she was told to move out at that second meeting? What happened next?
She didn't.
She
She didn't move out.
She did not move out?
right?
Okay. So what was the university's next step after that second meeting?
So that following week, when she hadn't moved out, we again this time sent staff over to the residence hall because we were aware she was there at the time. I think our director of security and director of student conduct went over and asked her to come over. And Dean Fraser and I met with Sydney again and
Okay.
said, you cannot be here any longer. You're not enrolled. And again said, why don't we call your parents? And she refused. She did not want us to. She absolutely did not want us to do that. We asked again, are you sure you told your parents?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know this is difficult. We know how hard this can be. And she absolutely did not want us to call her parents.
And what happened after that third meeting?
She did then move
Okay.
the
Was
rest
it
of her
that day
belongings
or
out.
soon after?
I believe it was that day.
Okay. So
Definitely by the next.
Okay, and Miss Powell then left campus.
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of where Miss Powell went or where she was going to be staying?
Home. She said home.
Okay. She told you she'd be moving back home?
Yes.
Okay. Now, students, they're allowed to have friends over who aren't enrolled at Mount Union,
Yes.
correct? Okay, so if Sydney wanted to visit her old roommate or her friends or sorority sisters, she could do that freely. She just couldn't be living there on campus.
Yes.
Okay. And I want to draw your attention specifically to March 3rd of 2020. Can you explain to me what was going on in the early morning of that day?
So Dean Fraser and I had been in a meeting together elsewhere in the building where our offices are located. When we came back to the office, we had a phone message from Mrs. Powell.
Now, when you say
asking us to
phone
call.
message, is that like a voicemail or how does that work?
They had spoken to our administrative assistant
Okay.
and asked for a call, asked for someone to call them about their daughter,
Who's they?
Brenda Powell.
Brenda Powell. Okay.
So,
And-
and our administrative assistant actually also said that the business office had called over with a question about, that Mr. Powell had called about the bill,
tuition.
Okay. Yeah.
So what did you and Mr. John Frazier do once you received that voice message?
So we were walking back together, and we still had some work to do from the meeting we left, and Dean Fraser said, why don't we just go to my office and make this call first?
Okay.
So we went in his office and called the number on the phone message that we were given, and Dean Fraser was sitting at his desk, and I was sitting next to it. He dialed. The phone was answered, and Mrs. Powell answered.
You say Mrs. Powell. Is that Brenda who answered?
Brenda answered, yes.
And what did you tell Brenda at that time?
So Dean Fraser was speaking and simply said, Brenda, this is Dean Fraser. I'm sitting here with Michelle Gaffney, our associate dean of students. We're returning your call, and that's about as far as we got.
Did Brenda respond to that introduction at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
what did she say?
I think he asked, "Is this Brenda Powell?"
Oh, okay.
And she said yes, and then he identified himself.
Okay. And Miss Gaffney, what happened next?
There was a very large or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by a pretty loud scream, and the scream might have actually been first, and then the thud.
Okay.
As I think about it, and then there was sort of an expulsion. The other sound that I heard at that same time, or right after, was sort of an expulsion of air, like the air was knocked out of somebody.
Okay.
I'd always heard that expression of the air being knocked, having the wind knocked out of you, but I didn't. That's actually what it sounded like. And then several more repeated thuds. I don't know how to describe the sound.
No, and that's okay. And you and Mr. Frazier could hear this from the other end of the phone.
From the other, it was on speakerphone, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear any communication during these thuds?
Just the screaming, and so we were both talking into the phone, saying, what's happening? are you okay? Do you need help? What's going on?
Yeah, can you describe your mindset at this time?
I mean, I very definitely felt like someone was being attacked. And so we weren't getting an answer. I think at some point I said, if you can't respond, we're going to call the police if we don't hear if no one can tell us what's going on. The dean's has an administrative assistant right outside his door. So I said, well, I'm going to get Sydney's address. And he kept talking. And so,
Mr. Frazier?
Mr. Frazier, yeah, Dean Frazier. So I opened the door and told our admin, I said, I need Sydney Powell's address right away. And in the meantime, I had my phone and I was looking up the number for the Akron Police Department.
No, yeah, why didn't, let me ask you this. Sorry, I interrupt you again.
It's okay.
Why didn't you want to call 911?
Because I knew it would go to Stark County Dispatch. I work with our security and the Alliance Police quite a bit.
Okay.
And we actually, when we need the police, we call the Alliance Police Dispatch and not 911 because it goes to Stark County and not Alliance.
Okay.
And they often don't. It takes longer.
So you wanted to get directly
I
in
wanted to get
contact
directly
with-
to, I knew she was from Akron. I wanted to get directly to the Akron Police. So
And Ms. Gaffney, can you describe how that phone call continued or what happened next?
So while Tara is our assistant, while Tara was looking up that address, the phone cut off at some point after. I would say that somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 of those thuddings, those sort of thud sounds, and the screaming had continued.
And when you say the phone cut off, did the call drop or
The
was
call
it
dropped.
hung?
Yeah,
Okay.
we lost the call.
Okay.
And so we decided to keep, while we were waiting for the address, to keep calling. We called the number back,
Brenda's number?
Brenda's number that she had left, and we called twice, and there was no answer. It rang and rang and rang and no answer. When it went to voicemail, we hung up and we called again. And then on the third time, and I had just gotten the address as the phone was answered.
Okay.
On the third try to the number, and Dean Frazier said something along the lines of, "Brenda, is that you? Are you there?" And the voice on the other end said, "Yes, this is Brenda." Yes, this is Brenda.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, did you recognize that voice on the line?
Yeah,
Okay. Was that Brenda
it
Powell?
was not Brenda.
Who did you recognize that voice to be?
I was sure it was Sydney. Both Dean Frazier and I looked at each other and sort of shook our heads at each other and said, that's not Brenda. And he then said, I don't, Sydney, I think this is you. This is not Brenda.
And what happened next?
The phone went dead.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, what did you do next?
We called the Akron Police. By that point, I had the phone number up and the address, and so we called the Akron Police and indicated we felt there was some sort of situation at this house and that they needed to send someone right away.
Did you have any other involvement with the Akron Police or the Powell family after that?
The police called back maybe a couple hours later and told us that, just to say that they had gone to the house and that they were, I believe what we were told was that they were transporting 2 women to the, I don't know which hospital they said, but one of the Akron hospitals. There were 2 women being transported to the Akron hospital and, thanked us for having called. But we asked who was going to the hospital and they couldn't tell us.
Okay. So you were never told by the Akron Police Department what had occurred or what was going on?
Not at that point. We actually, we learned about it on the news.
Okay. And then
The rest
later
of the details.
you
Yeah.
had an opportunity to meet or have a conversation with a detective with the Akron Police Department?
A couple days later,
Okay. And you shared the same information with him?
yes.
Okay. questions for you.
Okay.
And I'm going to take us way back to when we first started our conversation. In general, there's a difficult, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it difficult for a student to transition from high school to on-campus university?
It can be, yes,
In Mount Union, they recognize that struggle?
absolutely.
Okay. And Mount Union provides opportunities to try to work on that transition?
Yes.
And can you describe, in your experience, you've been with Mount Union and the university education for a long time, why might students struggle?
I think there's a variety of reasons. Academic preparation sometimes is certainly part of it. Sometimes trying to determine, at Mount Union, students struggle a lot. We have a lot of student athletes. Sometimes athletics doesn't work out for them, and that's been a big part of their identity, and so that's a struggle when they find that they are not excelling in that area, and then they have to figure out what they're going to do if athletics isn't their path. So there's all kinds of, but there are also just general personal obstacles and challenges.
Now, what's, in your experience, the average age of a freshman college or a first-year college student? How old are they?
Typically around 18.
Okay. And is it fair to say that in a lot of these situations, this is the child or the individual's first time away from home?
Yes.
Okay. In your experience, does that come with its own freedoms that students may struggle with?
They struggle with some students struggle with freedom, some struggle with homesickness, both.
Okay.
It's
And
amazing how many students are close to home and homesick when they only live 20 minutes away.
now, when you say freedom, what type of freedoms do college first-year students have?
They have the freedom to sleep in the morning, which is a real struggle for students in some cases, because so they don't always have someone there who is motivating them to get up and go to class and do some of those things. There's certainly the freedom of going to parties and staying out late, and those kinds of things as well. So the social freedoms, but also some of the lack of structure that they might have with high school and academics and people who are maybe more closely monitoring what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And I know this is kind of a goofy question, but university isn't like a high school where you're in the same building and you have a scheduled 8 a.m. to
Right.
9 a.m., 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Classes
Right.
are spread out.
Classes are spread out. You're actually only in class usually 15 to 20 hours a week of class time, and the rest is time that is expected for you to be working on papers and research and things like that on your own time. And so definitely there's not the structure, so you have to be motivated. You have to have good time management skills, all of those kinds of things.
Okay.
Those are the common struggles.
And we talked about suspensions. If a student is suspended, they can re-enroll and come back to Mount Union, correct?
Yes, it's usually just for one semester.
Okay. Do they lose all the credits they built in the previous years?
No,
Okay. They start back right where they left
right
off.
where they left off, yes.
Okay. So any credits they've earned by passing grades or they can
Yes.
still use towards graduation?
Yes, and in fact, the classes that they fail, they have the opportunity to replace the grades to take the same courses for a replace of change of grade. So if you failed a class and then you take it again the next semester and you get a B or an A in it even, that F is replaced with, so it can build your GPA back up very
quickly.
very quickly.
Now, I want to draw our attention back to Miss Powell. Did you receive any actual reports that Miss Powell was attending classes?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Were there any professors that reported that Miss Powell was wandering into their classroom or acting as if she was a student in their classroom?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. But when Miss Powell met with you that first time, she said she was meeting or talking to her faculty.
Yes, she said she had worked things out over the break. I don't know that she said she was talking to them since classes have begun, but that she had worked things out to get into classes.
Okay. Now, did any of Miss Powell's sorority sisters or roommates indicate that no, Miss Powell was in class with us?
No, I never heard. I mean, I know she was going to sorority meetings, but I don't know that she was going to class.
Okay. With any
With
specific
any of them.
friends?
No,
okay.
I'm not aware of it.
And we talked quite a bit about these three separate meetings you had with Miss Powell. And I want to talk about specifically When did she leave campus? What month was this?
It would have been in February,
Okay, would it be the beginning of February, end of
was-
February?
closer to the end.
Okay, close to the week of March 3rd?
Yeah, maybe,
Okay.
I would guess a week or so maybe prior to that, but
Okay.
yes,
So within 7 days from March 3rd?
yes.
Just 1 second, Ms. Gaffney. Your Honor, this time we have no further questions for Ms. Gaffney.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination?
Just very briefly, just one issue. Ms. Gaffney, do you remember being interviewed by Detective Sergeant Stermachi? Does that sound about right?
A detective, I couldn't tell you his, to be honest, I don't recall the name.
No problem. And do you remember telling the detective that you believe that Sydney Powell had left on Monday, February 24th? Does that kind of refresh your memory?
Right, it would have been like I said, close to the end of February, the last week
Okay,
of February.
that's all I have. Thank you, ma'am.
That bring anything up for you, sir?
No, Your Honor. Thank you, Ms. Gaffney.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down.